Hey guys, and welcome to another video. And today we're going to install a 360-degree view camera system in our notorious 2020 Toyota Corolla. So let's get into it, shall we?
So what is this 360 camera system? Well, it allows you to see from a bird's eye view of your car, which is really wild since it's kind of like watching yourself drive in a game of GTA, but in real life. How it works is that it takes 4 different video feeds from each side of your car and stitches everything together and 3D maps it around you. The best use of this is the top-down view when parking or reversing. Ever since I saw this feature in my friend's BMW, I wanted it so bad in my Corolla. You'll remember in my other video I replaced my Corolla's OEM infotainment system with an AINAVI H6 Android head unit. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you watch that series, as this is pretty much an extension to that project. My H6 supports the 360-degree camera system, and I'm going to show you how I installed it on my notorious 2020 Toyota Corolla. This 360 camera kit I ordered from AliExpress seems to be generic in terms of branding. They're all much similar in terms of hardware, and used quite heavily by pro installers. Now this kit only comes with the cameras and cables used for Android head units. As for the 360 software itself, you'll need to make sure that your Android head unit supports the 360 feature, as the app is typically baked into the firmware. In my case, I knew I wanted the 360 system before I bought my AINAVI head unit, so I made sure it had support. So you'll definitely want to check with your manufacturer first before diving into this project. The first thing you'll notice bundled are the long cables to run all the cameras to where they need to go. They're all color-coded, which is great because wiring is usually chaos. The cameras themselves are separated for the ease of installation, also color-coded and labeled. This particular camera kit also supports a maximum of 1080p HD resolution at 25 frames per second, which is great for clarity. It's an AHD kit, which is different from an older CVB camera system. You'll need to make sure that you choose the correct specs that are compatible with your Android unit. You'll see that there's 4 cameras, one for each side of your car. One pair of cameras are shaped similar for the front and back. These other 2 cameras are dome-shaped at a 45-degree angle, used to be mounted vertically underneath your side mirrors. Now these are supposed to be pointed outwards to capture views to the side of your car. And I just know these are going to be the most difficult to install. Here's the main cable that connects the camera wires to the Android head unit, in my case the AINAVI system. This is a dedicated harness that fits a 12-pin connector on the back of your unit. You'll definitely want to make sure you have this port. Here I'm demonstrating how each camera wire is connected by 3 sections. All these cables are essentially using a male and female 4-pin connector. You'll want to make sure that you align the small arrows together, then push it in firmly. There was a time that I didn't and thought the cameras didn't work, so make sure it goes in all the way. Now this kit also comes with a hole saw. You'll be using this attachment to drill a hole through the bottom of your side mirrors. This lets you insert your side cameras perfectly into them. You'll be somewhat modifying your car, which can be intimidating, so if you're queasy from doing so, I suggest taking this to a professional. Otherwise, you'll need to be 100% committed doing this yourself. And here are 2 mounting brackets. All the cameras have to be ideally mounted at a 45-degree angle towards the ground. You'll see later how I attach them to the car. They also provide 2 pairs of rubber grommets for the left and right cameras. They're both shaped differently, 2 that are flush horizontal, and the other 2 have a slight angle to them. These grommets act as a spacer to fit between the camera and underneath the side mirrors. Because not all side mirrors are shaped the same, most have a slight curve to them. So these angled grommets will be useful to keep the camera view parallel to the ground. Now if the camera is tilted too much, you run the risk of not having a full view of the side of your car needed for the 360 system to process correctly. So this is the entire 360 camera kit. Again, you'll need to find out if your Android head unit supports the camera system, and also that you can access its 360 view app. As an option, they do sell a standalone system at around $300 Canadian that switches your screen to a separate device. However, it might be a little bit more complex to set up. This video will only document my journey of installing the 360 cameras with my AINAVI H6 Android head unit. The first thing needed to do is to test all the connections and cameras to make sure they're working properly. Otherwise, we'll be spending all this time installing something and finding out it doesn't work. And we've all been there before. Now, you may notice that there are all sorts of bare wires sticking out of the camera connectors. These are for typically supplying power or supplying signals from existing wires. The good news is that we won't have to deal with all this if your Android head unit is set up like mine using the CAN bus decoder, taking signals directly from your car's data. Connecting the cameras to the head unit is pretty straightforward. All we need to do is connect the color-coded cables together, black to black, yellow to yellow, red to red, and blue to blue. It really doesn't get any simpler than this. Once all the colored wires are connected to the main 12-pin harness, you can plug that into the back of your Android head unit, in my case the AINAVI H6. Now, I'd like to thank one of my subscribers for pointing out that it is possible to take the frame off the AINAVI H6, which will allow me to bolt down the unit to the dashboard. It would have been a safety hazard if it wasn't secured somehow. To access the 360 view app, specifically on my AINAVI H6, again, this will be different according to your Android head unit, tap Settings, Display. We have to change the reverse mode from my OEM rear camera to AVM. Once you do that, you'll notice that the previous menu has changed. You'll want to change the AVM video format to your 360 camera hardware specs, which in my case is AHD at 1080p resolution. The higher the resolution on your camera is, the clearer the image will be. I'll also change the front camera type to AHD 1080p. Now, the AVM video frame rate I'll change to AHD 25 frames per second, as any higher will not work with my cameras. Now go back to your main dashboard, then to the app screen. You'll now see the new AVM app icon. Tap it to launch the app manually. If you get a notice in the app that your system is not activated, you'll need to contact your head unit manufacturer to possibly activate your app, as this is most likely a licensed piece of software. If there are no videos showing up, I found through a lot of trial and error that you'll have to physically disconnect your existing rear camera first if you were previously using it. Now that we know that the whole camera system is working, I'm going to show you exactly how I installed these 4 cameras on this notorious 2020 Toyota Corolla. This next whole segment is specifically based on my Corolla and similar models. If yours is different, hopefully you'll be able to take some ideas from here and apply it to your car. Now, I didn't record myself connecting the rear camera wire to the AINAVI H6, but I basically snaked the wire behind the passenger glove compartment and the side footwell of the Corolla. Most of these panels can be snapped off with a little bit of force, but at this point I'm pretty much familiar with taking my panels apart, installing things like rear dash cameras. Here I snaked and followed the other wires, and of course zip tying along the way. Here I hid the wire underneath the B-pillar. A lot of things you don't have to take apart if you don't have to. In the back seat, you can snake the wire underneath the weather stripping and up through the upper panel, or directly across behind the seat. There are a lot of ways at this point. Here you can see where the wire ended up. I used 2 zip ties to hold and protect the wire from sharp metal edges. Later, I'll use some wire loom for further protection. So guys, the placement of the new rear camera was a doozy. Toyota really sealed this area good, as there were no available openings to snake the camera outside the trunk as it is. As you don't see here, I spent countless hours trying to find new ways, even entertaining the idea of drilling holes through the metal, until I finally figured out how to take this plastic lip apart. I'll show you how, since basically I needed to take both rear brake light assemblies off to do so. We first need to get underneath by taking the cover off, which is held down by these plastic pins. I highly suggest buying this special trim tool to remove these. Anything else like a flathead screwdriver would always just ruin them. As you can see, here's where the OEM camera is hooked up. And on the other side, we have screws that we can't get to. We're going to have to remove a lot of bolts using a 10mm socket. You'll find that Toyota uses a lot of bolts of this size, so it's good to keep this adapter around. This project really requires a lot of things to be taken apart, so I should mention you do so at your own risk. If you're not as comfortable, you may want to leave it up to a professional, as it does take some commitment. I suggest taking a lot of pictures to document your install in case something happens or you forget how to put things back. You'll only have to lift the brake light assembly just a little, as we only need a small space for the plastic tabs when we remove the centerpiece. At this point, you guys don't know how much a relief it was just to get this cover off finally. I really wanted to take off the OEM camera, so I began to remove the 2 bolts. Then used pliers to clamp down on those tabs and push out those plastic bits. I continued with the disassembly until I realized that the actual camera mount is stuck on by automotive adhesive. And rather not mess with it, I changed my plan. I left it there as it is. To prepare the mount, the cameras have to be set at a 45-degree angle towards the ground. I attached the bracket that came with the kit to the camera using the tiny screws that they provided. Here, I remember having one of those haha moments where I can use one of the holes in the OEM camera mount to finally snake the new camera from the outside into the trunk. I felt that the wire was under a lot of tension, so I decided to wrap it around the other side of the OEM camera to give it some slack. The camera lens kept on hitting the car while I was playing with it, so to minimize any damage, I used the foam bag that it came with to help protect the camera. This is wire loom, and I use it here to keep the camera wire from contacting the metal edges of the hole. You'll want to use wire loom anywhere you feel that the wires can be exposed to some sort of danger. Here I'm dry fitting the placement of the camera. Obviously you'll need to align it as close as possible to the center. Now this is automotive adhesive. It's a double-sided foam tape which is extremely strong. Most of your car emblems and logos are stuck on basically by this. That's why I didn't want to remove the OEM camera mount because how permanent it was. It was kind of my intention to stick these small pieces on as a temporary thing. But let me tell you now, it's basically been weeks since this recording, and my camera hasn't budged one bit. And I've been through all sorts of weather. It's amazing. I don't even need to use the screws to mount it at all, which is a definite plus. These cameras are pretty lightweight, so I can imagine this being here for a very long time. After connecting the camera wire to the end of the yellow plug, this is how my final wiring looks. It's a good idea to have a bag of small zip ties to secure anything that's loose. I had to snake everything on the right side of the trunk due to not having enough slack in the wire. And you'll need to have some extra wire room for when the trunk closes. You'll notice that I used a zip tie to suspend the wire. I'll be putting some wire loom on it to help further protect it. Now for the front camera. We know that we have to snake a wire from inside the cabin into the engine compartment. But we have to get past this firewall that separates both areas. This firewall protects the cabin from any smells, smoke, gases, fires, so it's sealed up pretty good. In Toyotas, there is usually a big rubber grommet where the bundles of electrical wires come through. This will be our entry point for our camera wire. Now, this is one of those back-breaking jobs that I remember so well. It actually just hurts watching me do this again, so make sure you do some stretches before getting in there. You'll be spending a good amount of time underneath the driver wheel to get to the firewall from inside the cabin. After removing this plastic panel, the rubber grommet is located just above the accelerator pedal. If you remove some of that insulation, you'll find there's a small hole. This hole is actually that large nub that sticks out from the grommet outside. And I think this is intentional for people who want to wire stuff like powerful amps to the battery with even thicker gauge cables. So this is really the perfect spot to go through. Just to make sure, I grabbed a screwdriver and began poking into it. And I set my camera to record outside so that I can review for myself that I've got the right spot. I took this pick tool, not sure what it's properly called, but anything with a pointy tip will work, and pushed really hard to puncture through the rubber since it's very thick. As you can see, it was quite the struggle. I was careful not to go through too far and hit anything on the other side. We just needed to make a hole. I then used that same Phillips head screwdriver from before and punched through, which made the hole even larger for our camera wire to go through. And now the fun part of fishing the wire. I used this copper wire I had laying around, but you can also use a coat hanger as well, but the copper was easier to bend and play around with. I could even make hooks out of it if needed. I decided to pull the camera wire from the outside in, since the male plug was a lot smaller and it was a lot easier to push the copper wire through from the inside. After untangling the front camera wire, you'll see that it's color-coded black. And you'll want to make sure it's the male end going towards the cabin. We'll be using electrical tape to temporarily attach this plug to the copper fishing wire. The oversized gloves I was wearing didn't really help the situation when it comes to dealing with tape. To make it easier to pull the wire through the grommet, I used a spray of silicone lube, which is pretty harmless to the rubber and any components. Now that we have successfully pulled the wire through the firewall, we have to fish it again to the center console, which is so much easier since it's a straight shot up. It'll go into the female end of this black connector attached to the AINAVI unit. Using the same copper fishing wire, we'll pull the rest of the cable up. I decided to add some wire loom to help protect the cable from any sharp edges behind the console. You'll always want to zip tie things down where you can avoid any vibrations, especially from loose wires. We'll want to slide some wire loom to the outside cable. The kit already came with some for the front camera. Like I mentioned, anywhere that there is potential danger to the wires, I recommend wire loom to help protect it. In this case, it would be the engine. The heat coming off the engine will definitely be of concern, so I do recommend snaking the wire as far away as possible. Finally, it's time to mount the camera to the front of the car. We'll need to remove this cover first to allow access behind the front grille. It's held down by some plastic pins. You can push down on the center of the pins to loosen them, then using a pry tool to remove each one. I positioned the camera near the center of the grille between the plate and the Toyota logo. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly centered, but ideally it should be. I also bought this specialized front camera mount from AliExpress. Unfortunately, it didn't get delivered in time for this video. It would have made it a lot more professional looking, but it's only optional. Again, I used automotive adhesive to secure it temporarily to the grille. Ideally, you'll want to double it up or use a spacer to point it downwards to about a 45-degree angle. Now I finally connected the camera wires together and zip-tied everything down. Here's the path I took. The camera is quite secure in case it dislodges somehow. Any excess wire I simply bundled and zip-tied here. You can see how I positioned the wire going into the firewall, away from the engine area. So this project runs quite long, and I have a lot of install footage I don't want you guys to miss. So I'll be coming out with a part 2 of this series as I continue to document my journey to install and finally calibrate the 360 view camera system in my Corolla. Leave a comment in the section below. If you liked what you've seen so far, hit that like button. If you enjoyed my content, please consider subscribing to this humble YouTube channel. Alright, cheers guys.